In this video, I want to look at multiplying negatives, both a negative times a positive and a negative times a negative. And I want to start by looking at systematically how we go about this process. And then once I've done a few examples, I will look at explaining why we multiply this way when it comes to negatives. When multiplying negatives, a negative times a positive is negative, and a negative times a negative is positive. So let's do a few examples before we talk about why this is true. If we wanted to do negative 3 times 5, 3 times 5 is 15, and since we have one negative, one positive, negative 15. If we wanted to do 7 times negative 2, 7 times 2 is 14. Here I have one positive, one negative, so my answer is negative 14. For negative 4 times negative 6, 4 times 6 is 24. And I have two negatives, a negative times a negative, which would make this positive 24. So now let's look at why this works the way it does. To look at why multiplying a negative and a positive makes a negative number, let's look at this problem 2 times 3 minus 3. We can see that this is the same thing as 2 times 0, which is 0. However, we also have the distributive property in math, which says this is 2 times 3 plus 2 times negative 3. We know that needs to be equal to 0. Well, if I subtract 2 times 3 from both sides, then I could see that 2 times negative 3 is equal to negative 2 times 3. So we would just multiply the numbers and then include a negative sign. So if I want my distributive property to hold and the definition of multiplying by 0, it has to be that we just multiply the whole numbers and then make it negative when we're multiplying a positive and a negative. Now let's look at multiplying a double negative, a negative times a negative. Once again, this case we would have negative 2 times 0, which is equal to 0. But if I use my distributive property, negative 2 times 3, which we just discussed, plus negative 2 times negative 3. So we have that negative times a negative. And that should be equal to 0. We can add 2 times 3 to each side. And then we get that negative 2 times negative 3 is just equal to 2 times 3. So it's the positive result of just multiplying these whole numbers. 2 times 3 would be 6, so in this case, it would be 6. And we can substitute any numbers in for the 2 and 3 here. It doesn't just work for this. And so this works that multiplying a negative times a negative is the positive, so that we can still have our distributive property holding in this case, and the fact that negative 2 times 0 is equal to 0.